In this corner, the 2006 DC Direct Knightfall Catwoman. In this corner, the 2020 DC Essentials Knightfall Catwoman. And in this corner, the all-new Knightfall Catwoman from DC Multiverse. Cats may have 9 lives, but which one of these felonious felines will land on her feet? Place your bets and stick around. This is one catfight you don't want to miss. Welcome to 5 Points of Articulation, where I review action figures and then articulate 5 points to help you decide if you want to add that figure to your collection. The 5 points I discuss are packaging, presentation, posability, playability, and price. I'm Jason, and if you enjoy my content, please like, share, subscribe, do all the YouTube rigmarole. DC Direct comes in a specialized blister card. Up here we have a fractured bat logo, a Knightfall Batman Series 1. A little overly optimistic. One thing that's interesting is that the Catwoman name is actually not printed on, it's a sticker. This was a clever cost-saving measure so that every character in the wave could have the same card. Bios for all the characters, and cross-promotions with the trade paperbacks upon which they are based. Although I haven't reviewed this figure before, we've seen this Essentials box several times. Rather than the line DC Collectibles is the center, product shot on one side, a number to compel you to collect them all, and on the back we get another product shot, a bio, and other figures in the wave. Of course, we've seen the DC Multiverse so many times I feel like I could do this part in my sleep. Name and source material on the side, and then on the back we get some coy, fun Jim Ballant artwork that in no way represents the no fun Nancy in the box. If it were just between these two, I'd give it to DC Essentials on account of Essentials is more informative, but this one is simply made for this character instead of putting her as just part of a larger ongoing series. It's colorful, creative, informative, and for packaging, it wins this round. Moving on to presentation, and unfortunately the DC Direct Catwoman cannot stand up on her own without the aid of a figure stand. The tallest of the three, she stands at 7 inches on the dot. DC Essentials comes to just over 6.5, and DC Multiverse stands at just over 6.25. I should probably just get it out of the way that this Catwoman has a bit of a reputation. Remember how Arkham City had a notoriously big booty and I made a bunch of jokes about it, and then my dad showed up at the end and chastised me? This time McFarlane put the bulge in a slightly different place. Why hello Selena, is that a bullwhip in your pocket or are you just happy to see me? Don't worry though, I don't want another lecture from my dad, so I'm not touching this one with a 10-foot pole. I can't, she's got the 10-foot pole down her pants. Getting back on track, and the Knightfall era Catwoman design was popularized by Jim Ballant's classic run on the Catwoman comic. This figure is a surprisingly close approximation to what we saw on the page. Just looking at the key art that McFarlane used on his box, we can see just how playful and coy she was. DC Essentials also did a great job of capturing that face, though the hair is a bit lacking. Ballant's Catwoman had a messy tangle of curls. I love the blue highlights by the way, and I will say McFarlane did an admirable job on that. The face on the other hand leaves a lot to be desired. Don't be wrong, it's beautifully sculpted and painted. In fact, it looks like a very realistic woman. A woman who is deeply disappointed in you. The DC Essentials figure strikes a really great balance between comic book stylization and functional engineering, although I would be remiss if I didn't point out that this Catwoman is an almost complete reuse of this cheetah, right down to the clawed hands. Although they did modify the back to get rid of the tail, the only new pieces are the shoes, which by the way don't have peg holes, and the head. The Multiverse figure is a completely new sculpt, but it doesn't actually feel that way. Zooming on in, we can see a zipper running completely down her torso. That's just not something the Knightfall Catwoman had. It feels like they took the body of a Hush Catwoman and then gave her a new head and new limbs. Except that McFarlane hasn't made a Hush Catwoman. Honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if this wasn't going to be the base body for one. Throw in a new diaper piece with a belt to break up that torso articulation, and honestly, that wouldn't be half bad. As is, though, it just feels like an overly realistic interpretation of a character that was meant to be more cartoonish. That said, I love the distinction between the more satin-finished bodysuit with the high-gloss gloves and boots. Additionally, the seams running down the back is a nice touch, especially since it's in the back where a lot of people wouldn't have seen it. The Essentials figure unfortunately doesn't have any detail at all for the boots. Instead, the thigh cut is used to create the separation. The DC Direct figure looks like it stepped right out of a Jim Ballant comic, but even I have to admit that some of the sculpting is a bit dated. The McFarlane figure has the most detail, but I'd honestly say it's too much detail and robs her of her fun, flirty personality. DC Essentials has the personality Playability, but is literally just a blank body. Although I don't necessarily agree with all the creative choices that were made. For presentation, this round goes to McFarlane. Moving on to posability, and with your blessing, I'm not actually going to move any of the joints on this figure. That said, looking underneath her chin, we can see she does have neck articulation. Because of the hair, there's no way it's going to move, and so she's just kind of stuck permanently looking to the right. Moving on down, there is shoulder articulation. Giving it just a tug, it's either ball jointed or swivel hinge. Based on that crack of light, she seems to have bicep swivel, and also swivel wrists. Moving on down, she has disc hinge hips. I have gotten a little bit out of them, but I'm not going to push my luck. Also, looking at that other crack of light, it does seem she has thigh cut and single jointed knees. To be honest, that's a lot more than I was expecting. As for the other two, in DC Essentials has a ball joint and a disc hinge, and Old Sourpuss has a dumbbell joint. Naturally, neither figure can look up because of the hair, but whereas McFarlane can barely look down, Essentials can really bury the chin. That said, McFarlane does get a little bit of tilt, and since the hair is soft, she can look side to side. No tilt on Essentials, but side to side's no problem either. Moving down, Essentials can raise her arm up this high, and Multiverse can raise her arm up just a slight bit higher. McFarlane also has a rotator cuff, but I don't see it doing a whole lot of good here. Similar to DC Direct though, and her bicep swivel is very cleverly hidden by her glove, and whereas DC Essentials didn't do that, she does at least still have one. They also both have double jointed elbows. Moving on down though, and McFarlane has tiny wrist balls, whereas Essentials swivel and hinge. Moving to the middle, and because McFarlane has two joints, you might be tempted to think this one's going to have the edge, but you'll also notice just how high those panties rise. She can arch back this far, which is pretty impressive, though honestly pretty much the same as Essentials, but alas, McFarlane can only hunch forward this far compared to this. And of course, both get tilt and twist. Below the waist, and DC Essentials has ball jointed hips. McFarlane, of course, has McFarlane style hips, and I deserve a pat on the back for not making a below the waist joke. The Essentials figure can kick just under 90 degrees, which to McFarlane's credit can do much better, and whereas Essentials gets a near perfect split, McFarlane gets a perfect split. Similar to the gloves, and the boots would have been a perfect opportunity to hide a thigh cut, especially given what little twist she has, but Essentials more than makes up for it. Moving on down, they both have double jointed knees, which have about an equal bend, and whereas McFarlane has toe articulation, Essentials has boot cut. The McFarlane doesn't need that though, because her ankle balls allow her to swivel, but both figures can hinge and pivot. Considering I'm not even willing to flex this one's joints, I think we can all guess that she's not exactly in the running for this category, and as good as the range is on DC Multiverse, the most flexible feline is Essentials. Moving on to playability, and since this is Catwoman, we do have a bit of an idea what to expect, but since one of them is DC Essentials, we also have an idea what to expect. DC Direct comes with a whip, very realistic braiding detail, that fans out at the end. It's also really pliant, so it slides comfortably into her hand without any fear of breakage. DC Direct also comes with this Knightfall themed figure stand. For the purpose of this video though, I prefer the DC Multiverse stand just because it's less obtrusive. As for DC Essentials, she comes with a whole lot of nothing. I do think that Cheetah's claw hands were a clever reuse, but alternate hands and a whip really would have made this figure feel complete. On that note, you know what the McFarlane figure comes with? Alternate hands. She also has what may just be the most impressive Catwoman whip I've ever seen. Stem to stern, it's 20 inches long. Again, that braided detail is very authentic. Some nice detail at the handle, and since it's a DC Multiverse figure, she also comes with a trading card and a figure stand. Pause here if you want to read it. Do any of you actually do that, by the way? Sound off in the comments below. But playability is more than just cards and claws and cat o' nine tails. It's also about how well your figures play with others. First things first, we've got to look at the original Kenner Catwoman from Legends of Batman. Here we see my entire litter of Knightfall Catwomen together. It's interesting because she has the matte finish gloves and boots of Essentials, but the purple is a near dead ringer for McFarlane. This was pretty much my go-to Catwoman for years. One thing that confused me about this figure is why she's holding her whip when clearly it's sticking out of her thigh-high boot, especially when we all know where she really keeps it. With so many Selenas, I'm going to keep things simple and focus on Batman. This one's by DC Direct and is technically Hugo Strange with an alternate Batman head. That said, the sculpt started out as being Batman from The Killing Joke. On to one of my favorites in my Batman collection, and here we have Knightfall Batman from DC Essentials. True story, it was these two figures that made me finally cave and start collecting that line. Hopefully I'll love the upcoming McFarlane one just as much. Moving over to McFarlane, and here we have Detective Comics 1000 from the very first wave of DC Multiverse. There is a blue and gray variant of this which I really wish I had right now, but again, once that new Knightfall figure comes out, I have a feeling that the point will be moot. For one of my favorite McFarlane Batmans, however, and here we have Arkham Knight. Don't get me wrong, I appreciate the simple charm of the classic comic artwork a lot more, but if Batman were real, I think this is closer to what he'd be like. Speaking of the simple charm of the classic comic artwork, and here's Batman Year 2. Until the official one was announced, this is the closest we've gotten to a McFarlane Knightfall. I hope you don't mind I didn't include the cape this time around, it's just really big and ponderous. Sharing many of the same body parts with Year 2 is Batman from the Three Jokers. This is a lot of collectors' favorite Batman figure, and honestly, these two look pretty good together. Next up is DC Rebirth. Thanks to his smaller size, the Essentials figure scales really well. Depending on your view, this design is either famous or infamous for the addition of purple, showing that maybe Catwoman is getting under his cape. Inspired by the artwork of Lee Bermejo as Batman from Page Punchers, stylistically I don't think these could be any more different, but thanks to the added detail, this pairing doesn't look half bad. For one of my favorites of 2022, and here we have Speeding Bullets. Strictly speaking, this is Superman under the mask. I really love the proportions of this figure and would love to see it adapted as a basic version of Batman and or Superman. Of course, we can't talk about Knightfall without bringing up Azrael. Even as Walmart exclusives go, this one was particularly hard to find, and once we had him, a lot of collectors were let down by the overly bright color scheme and the mismatched gold. For one last video game figure, and here's Batman from Arkham City. It's a combination of the Arkham Asylum figure with a few new parts. I don't love this figure as much as some of you do, but I've got to admit that these two look pretty good together. Lastly, here we have the blue and gray Batman from Hush. Until Knightfall comes along, this is definitely going to be my go-to Batman figure, though I do wish he wasn't quite so tall. For a relative scale comparison, here are all of our Selenas with Pizza Spidey and the Spectacular Spider-Man. You remind me of someone I know. And as always, here they are with Stealth Iron Man. As much as I love the DC Essentials figures, I have to concede that they don't have a lot to offer. And while DC Direct at least has a whip and a display stand, DC Multiverse has a whip, a display stand, multiple hands, and more figures to play with. For playability, this round goes to McFarlane. This leaves us with nothing left to discuss but the price. I was able to nab the DC Direct figure at a local toy store for only $35, and while she originally retailed for only $12.99, today she'll set you back between $60 and $75. As for DC Essentials, she originally retailed for $28, but now goes between $45 and $60. As for McFarlane, she's available right now at retail for only $22.99. Lack of accessories aside, the DC Essentials one is my personal favorite, but for price, this round goes to McFarlane, who wins the battle 3-1-1. To be honest, my only problem with this figure is that it's supposed to be Knightfall. If this same figure was in, say, a different color scheme, I'd probably like it a lot better. But that's a video for another day. If you like this video, check out one of these. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back again real soon, but until then, play nice and have fun.